The ship was still sailing. Its cargo remained untouched. Food supplies remained on board. Personal belongings had been left behind, and there were no obvious signs of violence. Yet every single person aboard had vanished. No captain remained aboard. No crew could be found, and there was no clear explanation for where they had gone. Only an abandoned vessel drifting alone through the Atlantic Ocean. To this day, the story of the Mary Celeste remains one of the most enduring mysteries in maritime history. More than 150 years later, historians still cannot say with complete certainty what happened aboard the ship, or why 10 people suddenly disappeared without a trace. In November of 1872, the Mary Celeste departed New York Harbor, bound for Genoa, Italy. At first glance, the voyage appeared ordinary. The vessel carried more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol intended for commercial use in Europe. And aboard were 10 people: Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 experienced crew members. Nothing about the voyage suggested disaster. Captain Briggs was experienced, disciplined, and widely respected among sailors. Friends described him as cautious, calm under pressure, and deeply responsible. Exactly the kind of captain trusted with difficult Atlantic voyages. Before departure, preparations followed a familiar routine. Supplies were loaded, letters were written, and family members gathered at the docks to say goodbye. For those aboard, this likely felt like another demanding but routine journey across the ocean. No one imagined it would later become one of history's greatest maritime mysteries. At first, the voyage progressed normally. The Mary Celeste sailed eastward across the Atlantic, while another merchant vessel, the Dei Gratia, departed on a similar route only days later. For several weeks, there was little reason for concern. Weather conditions remained difficult at times, but not unusually severe for the season, and nothing suggested the voyage was in serious danger. Then, on December 4th, 1872, everything changed. Near the Azores Islands, sailors aboard the Dei Gratia noticed a vessel moving strangely across the water. From a distance, something immediately seemed wrong. Several sails appeared damaged, the ship drifted unevenly, and no one could be seen aboard. Captain David Morehouse soon recognized the vessel. It was the Mary Celeste. Repeated signals were sent toward the ship, but no response came back. No crew appeared on deck, no movement could be seen aboard, and no explanation emerged for the strange silence surrounding the vessel. Concern slowly turned into suspicion. Eventually, a boarding party crossed over to investigate, and what they discovered immediately made no sense. The ship had been abandoned. Captain Briggs was gone. His wife and young daughter had disappeared. The crew had vanished. Yet strangely, much of the vessel remained intact. The cargo had not been stolen. Food supplies remained on board. Fresh drinking water was still available, and many personal belongings had been left untouched inside cabins. Clothing remained neatly stored. Tools sat where they had last been placed, and nothing suggested the kind of violence one might expect aboard an abandoned ship. But something had clearly gone terribly wrong. One of the first unusual discoveries involved the ship's lifeboat. It was missing. This immediately suggested the crew may have left voluntarily. Yet, if that were true, an obvious question followed. Why would experienced sailors abandon a functioning ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? The Mary Celeste had sustained some damage, but investigators quickly concluded it was still seaworthy. A small amount of water had entered the hold, yet nowhere near enough to explain a desperate evacuation. In fact, after minor repairs, the ship was capable of continuing its journey. Then, investigators noticed something else. Important navigation equipment had disappeared, including the sextant, the marine chronometer, and the ship's official papers. These were not objects sailors normally abandon during an emergency. Their absence suggested Captain Briggs may have expected the crew to continue traveling elsewhere, possibly aboard the missing lifeboat. Exactly where the crew believed they were going, or how long they intended to remain away from the ship, remains unclear. The final entries in the captain's logbook only deepened the mystery. Nothing alarming appeared in the records. No major storm had been reported, no signs of conflict had been described, and no emergency had been recorded. The final known entry placed the Mary Celeste relatively close to the Azores Islands. Then suddenly, the story ended. For newspapers at the time, the mystery quickly became international news. an abandoned ship drifting through the Atlantic with its passengers and crew mysteriously missing seemed almost impossible to explain. Theories spread quickly. Some believed pirates had attacked the vessel. Ships disappearing at sea was hardly unusual during the 19th century, and piracy still existed in some regions. But investigators quickly identified problems with this explanation. Nothing valuable had been stolen, the cargo remained untouched, and there were no signs of violence aboard the ship. Others suspected mutiny. Perhaps the crew had turned against Captain Briggs. But again, serious questions emerged. Briggs was widely respected, and no evidence suggested tension among the sailors. If mutiny had occurred, why abandon the ship entirely? Why leave valuable cargo behind? And why disappear without leaving evidence of conflict? Another theory focused on the weather. Some historians believe Captain Briggs may have become convinced the vessel faced immediate danger. The ship's pumps appeared unreliable, making it difficult to accurately judge how much water had entered the lower sections of the vessel. In rough seas, a cautious captain might reasonably fear the Mary Celeste was in greater danger than it actually was. If Briggs believed the ship might suddenly sink, he may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat temporarily while remaining attached to the larger vessel by rope. In rough conditions, even a single broken rope or sudden shift in weather may have been enough to separate the lifeboat from the ship entirely. Once adrift in open water, returning to the Mary Celeste may have become impossible. While this explanation helps answer some questions, important uncertainties still remain. Historians continue to debate why experienced sailors would abandon a functioning vessel so quickly, particularly when supplies remained on board and conditions did not appear severe enough to suggest immediate catastrophe. Another explanation focused on the cargo itself. The Mary Celeste had been carrying industrial alcohol, a highly flammable substance capable of producing dangerous fumes. Researchers later noted that several barrels appeared empty rather than damaged, leading some historians to believe alcohol vapor may have leaked into parts of the ship. If unusual smells or unfamiliar sounds began coming from below deck, Captain Briggs may have feared the cargo had become unstable. For a cautious captain traveling with his wife and young daughter, temporary evacuation may have seemed safer than remaining aboard a potentially dangerous ship. At sea, however, temporary decisions can quickly become irreversible, especially in uncertain weather conditions. For generations, stranger theories continued to emerge. Some blamed sea monsters, others suggested paranormal events, conspiracies, or unexplained disappearances that defied ordinary understanding. Over time, fictional retellings exaggerated details even further, falsely claiming untouched meals still sat waiting on tables as though people had vanished instantly. But historical evidence tells a quieter and perhaps more unsettling story. There was no dramatic wreck, no visible catastrophe, and no obvious signs of violence. What remained was an ordinary merchant vessel discovered under circumstances that still resist complete explanation. And perhaps that uncertainty is what continues to fascinate people more than a century later. Because the story of the Mary Celeste is ultimately not just a mystery about a missing crew. It is a story about uncertainty, fear, and how quickly confidence can disappear when experienced people are forced to make difficult decisions in an unforgiving environment. Somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, the truth disappeared with them. And even now, more than 150 years later, we still cannot say with complete certainty what happened during the final days aboard the Mary Celeste. If you enjoyed this story and want to explore more real historical mysteries and forgotten disappearances, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.